Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. How are you this morning? You having a good festival? Excellent. So I'm Simon Kilmurry. I'm the Executive Director of the International Documentary Association. And I'm very happy to welcome you this morning to our opening panel, Why Documentaries Matter. And we have a great lineup of people here, and there's a lot of them. So I'm going to enforce a couple of rules. One is to ask our panelists if they just agree with someone, they don't have to repeat what someone else has said. If it's been said, it's been said. So we can move on. They can acknowledge that, and because I want to leave plenty of time for all of you to engage with our panelists this morning. So when I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking back to I've been involved in the documentary film world for about 20 years, and when I asked the question, why documentaries matter, my automatic answer is yes. But sometimes it's good to interrogate those questions. And I was asked to write a column for The Hollywood Reporter shortly after the inauguration, and it got me thinking a little bit. And one of the things I wrote was that, in my opinion, documentary film is essential to a healthy and democratic society, and that's one reason why it's feared by autocrats. Documentary film is a form that allows us to walk in another's shoes, to build a sense of shared humanity, that gives voice to the marginalized and to the scorned, and that strives to hold those in power to account. And that in these challenging times, when journalism is held in such contempt that Steve Bannon can freely tell the media to keep its mouth shut, it's all the more important to support the ever-risky endeavor that documentary filmmaking is becoming. And in December at the IDA Awards, we had the honor of giving Norman Lear a Lifetime Achievement Award, and Norman put it a little more pithily, where he said, now's the time to fight our asses off to support documentary filmmakers. So that's the question we have before us. So, I'm going to pose that to our panelists. Why do documentaries matter? Or do documentaries matter, in their opinion? But before I go down a row and ask them to each answer that question, I want them to preface it with a very brief and pithy introduction, because you have all their bios in the book, so please go read those. So instead of giving us your bio, tell us one thing, before you answer the question, one thing in your bio or in your experience that you would highlight if people asked you, who is Ben Lear, who is Sasha Alpert, one thing in your experience that would you would like people to know about you, and then answer the question, in your opinion, why do documentaries matter, or do documentaries matter? So let's go down the panel and introduce yourself, and then answer that question, please.
Starting from the
starting with you, Ben. I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay.
And please go see Ben's film at 1 o'clock.
Well, I said this. I was realizing the other day. I was introduced before a Q&A. My bio is relatively short. I'm a first-time filmmaker and a former musician, composer. So I guess I would highlight that I come from a music background, and I have found a number of striking parallels between the two creative processes, and I feel like the composition work that I did in the past, aided in the making of this film in ways that are hard to describe, but I found it interesting. Do documentaries matter? I think absolutely. When I think about documentaries, letting go of my personal experience having made one, but just as a fan, as a viewer, I think all the times in my life growing up that I've had the most powerful change of heart and mind experience through film, it's been through documentary. Whether it was seeing, a film like Blackfish, or seeing a film like Hoop Dreams and being transported to another world that I'd never been to before, and absolutely outraged by a broken system, or some flaw in our society that feels, in the way that the film portrays it, so fixable, so solvable, and it motivates you to act. And that's always been. But the best films do that without propaganda, without telling you to, just by showing you the reality, showing you an entire spectrum of humanity, and allowing you to connect your humanity to that in the film, and come to the conclusion that you got to do something to make the world a better place. Documentaries do that. It's very cool. I'm happy to be a part of that world, and happy to be part of the panel.
Sasha?
I'm Sasha Alpert, and I've produced a number of documentaries that are social impact documentaries. And I started doing this and wanting to do this with my life because I saw a lot of documentaries when I was young that changed the way I look at things. And I think documentaries right now are more important than ever when people get their news in these teeny little increments. And I think the millennial generation particularly, but all of us, really crave a deep dive into something that tells us two sides of an issue and really can teach us a lot about what we don't know by just reading the headlines. So I've seen documentaries change people's minds. I have seen issues evolve, even through documentaries that I've produced. I made produced one of the early documentaries about kids with autism, and the way that people view autism now is drastically different because of many films and because of many things. But I remain committed to this medium. I think it is a fantastic way to learn about an issue, and I think it's really, really important when you make a film to have a plan of how it's going to be seen and impact people, to help evolve people's thoughts on things. So that's all I'll say.
Great.
Okay, my bio. I got into documentary filmmaking in the early 80s, so I've been doing this for quite some time. And I guess maybe the one offbeat or surprising thing was that my role models when I started, and still to this day, were not other documentary filmmakers, but some of the great compelling storytellers like Hitchcock and Costa-Gavras. Some of you know him. He had a lot of movies when I was just getting out there, and later, Spielberg and Scorsese. My biggest fear as a filmmaker was that people were going to get bored, and they were going to walk out, they're going to change the channel, and they were going to look at something else. So I said, how do you keep them in their seats? How do you keep them asking questions? All those tools that good storytellers use. And to this day, I feel like that's one of the things that documentary filmmaking, needs to elevate it itself is really good storytelling and not just an issue. Does documentary filmmaking matter? I think, of course, it matters, and for the reasons that that Simon talked about. I think that it's, first of all, I come up through documentary filmmaking. There's so many types of documentary filmmaking. For me, it's more of like a journalism bent, a journalism background, and because of the decline in journalism, in daily journalism, for all sorts of reasons, I think documentary filmmakers are filling some of the gaps of investigative reporting that, because newspapers have shrunk, or what are newspapers anyway? They'll be asking in 20 years. So I think that that's important. But the other thing that I want to say is that I want to pose a challenge to myself and to the rest of documentary filmmakers to elevate our standards. I think that a lot of people get into documentary filmmaking because they have a passion, and often a passion for a social issue to tell, to move, to change the world. We all think we're going to change the world. And I think one of the things that happens sometimes, not with the best documentaries, but sometimes, is we take shortcuts. We, imply cause and effect where it's not there. We manipulate too much, and I think one of the reasons that journalists have been held in lower and lower esteem as the generations move on is because of the sloppiness there. And I think we are in danger of having less effect if we don't hold ourselves to high standards. And so people can really trust what we put out there on the screen as the truth and something that should be paid attention to.
Thank you for that. Jay.
You're talking about bio. Can I borrow someone's program? Do I even have a bio? I haven't even seen it, but seriously, I don't know. So maybe the best way I can fill that in is you asked for something that was significant. And I would say the most significant thing that I would mention is in 1997, I finished a film called In Whose Honor, which was a very critical film of the use of American Indian mascots in sports, which may have kind of touched a tiny nerve here at the University of Illinois. And at any rate, because of that film, when I came to be hired as a faculty member, and I'm a faculty member here today, 3 members of the Board of Trustees voted to keep me from getting hired, and I believe I'm the only faculty member in the history of this institution to have gotten hired and have board members vote against you. So, does documentary film making matter? It seemed to have mattered to them. Yeah, you're welcome. It's easy to play to the home crowd here. I've got that advantage. At any rate, Rick, thanks for your comments, by the way. I agree with Rick, and I often do. But I just want to say, I actually think that that's not quite the right question to ask. I think really the right question to, I'm being serious now, so I think the right question really now to ask is not whether documentary films matter, but how do we make documentary films that matter, and how do we get the documentary films that we make to matter?
That was my next question.
And thank you very much.
And we will come back to that, Jay. Matt.
I just got married a couple of months ago, and
Congratulations.
my wife Nancy is right back there. Hi, Nancy. Documentaries matter. The big problem is getting documentaries to matter to people who don't watch documentaries. Yeah. That's the biggest problem. And I've been a critic and filmmaker for almost 30 years now. And one thing I have noticed about different genres is of all the different genres of movies, documentary sounds, it's almost too broad to call it a genre, but nonfiction films, I find it is easier to get people into nonfiction films than almost any other kind of movie. Every other kind of movie that I try, like if you try to get people into horror movies, action films, romantic comedies, whatever, musicals, you run into issues of personal preference that you just can't get around. But nonfiction films just don't seem to have that problem. And I've seen time and time again people who aren't really into documentaries, suddenly that's all they watch. And that's why some people have Netflix. Like it's like, what, there's scripted TV on Netflix? I didn't know that, and they want to tell you about some, Iraq War documentary that they just watched last night. So that's great, but the problem is getting people to watch them. And then once you get people to watch them, I think increasingly the problem is getting people to actually watch them, as opposed to half watch them while doing this. And that's a problem. It's a serious, serious problem. And it's fashionable to blame it, to sort of say, oh, young people today with their phones, but it's like, I got one too. I just became a teacher this year. Started teaching a course on the history of arts criticism, and it's tough. Like, I really had to be like the entertainer of the year to get people to not look at their phones every 5 minutes. And it took me a while to realize that it wasn't necessarily an insult against me. It's just that people's brains have been rewired to not want to concentrate on one thing for very long. I don't know exactly why that is. I have a number of theories, but it's rough. It's really rough. And another possibly related problem is, and I found this being a part of social media, like I've been on Facebook and Twitter for like 8 years now. One thing I have noticed is that people, even smart people, even educated people, won't actually read something that you post before they give their thoughts on it. I can't tell you how many times that I've posted an article about whatever subject, some film subject, and somebody will say, you know what's a really good movie in that vein? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, actually, blah, blah, blah is mentioned in the second paragraph of the piece that I posted. And it's like, there's no way to say that without sounding like a jerk, but it's a problem. It's a problem. And I heard just the other day, a friend of mine said, most people listen not with the intent of understanding, but with the intent of replying, which I think is very true. And documentary films, see how I'm taking it home? Woo! Documentary films are really ideally about getting people to understand something. I think bad documentary films are only interested in replying. But many of them, most of them, I would like to think are about helping people understand things. And you can't have understanding without full attention, and you can't have understanding if people don't know that your film is out there. So there's a lot of different issues to think about.
Hang on, Matt, can I give you a teaching tip?
Yes.
After 16 years?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have the students shut off their phones, and if they look at them, I throw them out of class.
That's good. That's good.
To the point.
I'm Nell Minow, and when I was a sulky teenager, my mother was trying to explain to me that I should read something in the newspaper beside the comics and Ann Landers, and I said it was all boring. And she said, well, the Sun-Times has got a new movie critic, and he's just a few years older than you are, and he's barely out of his teens himself, and you like movies, why don't you read it? And that, of course, was Roger Ebert, and Roger is a big part of the reason, not just that I'm a movie critic, but that I'm a writer. I really fell in love with his way of writing about movies, and I became the movie critic for the New Trier News. Our team was then the Indians, but it's now the Trevians, and
You're welcome.
and Roger Ebert and Mike Royko, they were my two polar stars. Do documentaries matter? Well, why don't we ask United Airlines? Yes, and one of the things that I love about this moment of documentaries is the way that they are democratized. When I think about the story that you told about how difficult it is, in Hollywood Shuffle, about how difficult it was to get your story out there and how that has changed, and a YouTube video can go viral. I think that's very, very compelling. When movie critics go to movies, very often they'll surround us with civilians so we can understand what a real audience is like. But often when we're there by ourselves, you don't hear a lot of laughing. You don't hear a lot of emotion. People will be right, oh, that was funny. They don't get too excited because that's what we do. But by far the most intense reaction I've ever seen in a movie was to a documentary from critics, was to a documentary. The day before, the same group of us, there are about 30 of us in Washington, D.C., who all go to movies together, all critics are all buddies. And we'd seen one of the Matrix movies, and you know what that was like, a lot of, very intense action. Everybody's like, yeah, that was pretty good, And the next day we went to see the movie Spellbound, about the spelling bee. And the mood in the audience was they would give these 12-year-olds these words, and everyone went, what? Are you kidding me? So documentaries matter. Roger always said that movies are empathy machines. Documentaries are unfiltered empathy machines. Those are real people. That is really happening. Those are real nuns on the bus, and you do get very involved. Documentaries, I would say 90% of the time, documentaries are about incredible passion. I have seen 2 documentaries about jump rope, and I was riveted by both of them not because I care about jump rope. I care about the people, and the documentaries make you understand what these people are about in a way that is just, there's just no other way to be that compelling. And I also almost brought down my entire website. I almost bankrupted them by giving an F to a documentary, and I will tell anybody that story who wants to hear it later.
Robert Townsend.
Robert.
It was a documentary from a group called Focus on the Family.
Enough said.
It's the only review of that movie on Rotten Tomatoes, which gives it an F rating from everybody.
Wow.
Wow. From Movie Mom.
And they pulled all of their advertising from the entire website that I work for as a result, and got all of the other movie studios to pull theirs as well.
Oh my God. Oh, wow.
It was a very bad review. I really took them to pieces.
Okay. All right.
Robert,
please. I'm Robert Townsend, writer, director, producer. Everybody has said pretty much what I wanted to. So I agree with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do documentaries matter? Yes, they matter a lot. The last documentary I saw was really disturbing. Was Vexed. Vexed. Has anybody seen that one?
Yeah.
It is powerful. So I think documentaries matter, but I agree with everybody on this panel. More stories need to get out. And when you talked about United, Airlines, that whole fiasco, citizen journalism is on the rise. Now everybody has a camera, so it really does matter.
I'm Brian. Bio fact: I have 3 kids under 7, so I see a lot more Pokemon and Paw Patrol than documentaries. So. Documentaries matter to me a lot. Like he said, everyone said so many interesting things already. I would add this: I think we can't forget that documentaries matter because art matters, and documentaries are art. They're not just forms to learn about things. One of my favorite Roger quotes is, "It's not what a movie is about; it's how it is about it." So we need to keep in mind that Errol Morris and Steve James, they're artists as much as they are journalists and informers. And nowadays, with art being seemingly marginalized more than it ever has been, documentaries matter because art matters.
Well, hi, I've been writing about film, teaching film for a long time. I'm retired now, but still writing and doing research. And
Richard,
first,
just tell people who you are. Just
I'm
your
sorry,
name.
Richard Leskosky.
They can all see that.
It says
Thank you.
here, so I can read it here. I was at first worried because I thought, I'm going to be the first one, and I'm going to have to say it. But then I'm the last one. I'm not supposed to repeat anything that anybody else has said, so I don't know. But I'll point out that the important thing about documentaries is that they tell us about things we don't know. Now, back in 2002, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld made a comment about known unknowns having to do with weapons of mass destruction and so on. And documentaries, do tell us about our known unknowns, the things we don't know about, like you know that there are penguins in the Antarctic, but you don't know what they're. And then March of the Penguins comes along, but there are unknown unknowns, things that you just ordinarily wouldn't even think about that you don't know, and then a great documentary will come along and reveal that to you, like. And then I'm going to blank on something on it, oh sure, like somebody mentioned Blackfish. Oh, this is what things are really like in SeaWorld and so on. So yeah, documentaries are important in telling us about things that we don't know and should know about. And as Brian was saying, it's important that documentaries are also art, and that's something that is important today because, sure, documentaries tell us about the real world, but we're also awash in reality TV, and which at least purports to be pictures of the real world, but oftentimes are scripted, or at least are parts of a real world that you're not really interested in, and you probably wouldn't well, things like Duck Dynasty and Real Housewives of Atlanta. Yeah, that's not the sort of thing that is going to help make you a better person, or
Did you see the last episode? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'll ask you about that later. Okay. So I guess yeah, that's it.
So thank you all. So I want to kind of throw this out to all of you, and whoever raises their hand first. And it's really following up on what Jay and Matt were raising. If we agree that these films do indeed matter, that they make a change in the world, how do we get audiences to engage? What's the next step? Chaz has made some wonderfully passionate comments about empathy and how cinema evokes this feeling and this quality. But then how do we give people the tools to activate that, to engage in the next step?
I think the game has really changed because of social media. I mean, because now everybody gets to weigh in. Everybody really has a voice. So if you see something, everybody here has a Facebook page, a lot of people on Twitter. You can let people know right away, and then you can really affect the outcome of that film, that documentary at the box office. Because if you say, hey, you got to go see this, and I'm just a regular person, it's effective. And if everybody has friends, if there's a theater in town, you could drive a whole audience to that theater if you really believe in it. You know what I mean? And I think that's where word of mouth is always going to be paramount.
I would add to that with our film, Sasha and my film, which came out digitally in January. Facebook has been an enormous tool for us. We put a trailer on Facebook, and it caught with young people from the communities that the film is about. So like young Hispanic people all over the country were sharing the film like crazy, and it gave us like a really amazingly transparent tool to see exactly who was really grasping onto this and wanting to share it, which was amazing. And then another thing, just specifically, we've been working with a company called Tugg, Tugg, and they do theatrical screenings on demand. So if you have a community that you feel like would really love a particular film, but it's not playing there theatrically, you can request to have that film shown in your community for free, provided you can pre-sell, I think, 60 tickets. So it's just, you got to just go around, get your people excited about it, and if you can sell 60 tickets, that movie is shown at your local cinema theater, which gives it also a level of legitimacy and the fun of like a real movie-going experience. And we've been doing that, and it's been really, really cool. So that's an interesting, that I think fits a pocket that didn't really exist before, that allows you to have that. Because I think the theatrical experience is still very, very important for documentaries and for all types of films. If you can have that experience still, and Tugg gives another way to have it. So.
Yeah, Rick. And speaking to the mic.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure I can answer your question, but I can maybe put a finger on some of the challenges that we have. In this world of like instant media and United Airlines videos, and everybody's got a cell phone, I think there's a blurring in the public mind of what's a documentary film and what's real life and what happens to be in the public mind because somebody had a camera to document it. And there's advantages to that. I mean, I think the whole Black Lives Matter movement has, to its credit, blossomed because of that sort of thing. And I also think the downside to that is that there's so much to overcome to really do a good, thorough documentary film and somehow rise above, it has to be in-depth, has to be creative in a new way, and has to rise above all the challenges of TV shows, of YouTube, of good dramatic films, everything that's out there that's competing against it. And so I think what that means is we have to be that much more creative, that much more new in terms of the way we present things. We have to stick to our ideals and tell stories in depth, which is not something you can do with just a cell phone and capturing something on the street. So to me, the actual distribution things, which you talk about Tug and other things, I think those are important. But what's even more important, I think, is that we elevate our product, and that's a big challenge. I think that documentary film, in a way, faces more challenges now, even though there are more of them, and they've increased by 100-fold. That we face more challenges than we've ever faced before, because we've got to break through all the noise.
I think there's a critical responsibility in that too. Speaking for Matt and Nell and myself, at RogerEbert.com, we make a concerted effort to find those documentaries, to pull them out from the fray. Matt was talking about how there's hundreds of documentaries on Netflix. Most of them are not very good, just a heads up. And it concerns me that there's sort of a white noise, bigger pool now, that it's harder for the good stuff to get to the surface and find a place with an audience. So it's important for critics to play a role, as Roger did, bringing so many important documentaries to the surface, maybe more than ever, because, as you're saying, people are recommending things on social media every day. Like, it's just constant. It's impossible to keep up with all your Twitter followers and all they like. So there's a role for festivals too, festivals and critics, to bring important documentaries to a wider audience.
There's also, sorry, go ahead.
If you could speak into the mic, Jay.
There's some related issues with that. One of them is social media has an echo chamber effect, and I've noticed an echo chamber effect that has spread to documentary film and kind of films that people watch and recommend to other people. A documentary that has any kind of political content, or that is any way a political interpretation of history, increasingly I find is going to be shared and liked by people who are inclined to agree with whatever its message is. And this is true, I think, for people politically in every kind of spectrum. And the only kinds of documentaries that really break through and appeal to everyone are the ones that don't really seem to have that much political content. You get some outliers like Michael Moore, not so much recently, but he used to be capable of, making movies that made as much money as a lot of big scripted films. With huge advertising budgets. But for the most part, a documentary that crosses over and becomes a big success, like the kind that makes the industry sit up and take notice, is something like, was it Keddy? The
Cat.
yeah, it's okay. See, everybody in this room has probably seen that. I couldn't believe how much money that made. The first weekend, I thought, this has got to be a mistake. This has got to be a misprint. There's too many digits on that number.
Cats.
But everybody loves cats.
Yeah.
Everybody loves cats. Who doesn't? Even if you hate cats, you can't get away from them. But a lot of documentaries that are successful. There's another issue that I'm kind of fixated on, to the point where it annoys people that I talk about it so much. But I want to see more documentaries that are old school documentaries, where the filmmakers identify a particular subculture, a particular event, a particular person, and they just present them. And it's been bothering me I started noticing it really about 10, 15 years ago. More and more documentaries, and I understand there's a commercial imperative to do this, they try to borrow the elements of particular fictional genres, and you'll hear the filmmakers even using these when they promote the movie. They'll say, well, it's not a film about this great trial, it's like a great courtroom thriller. Or they'll say, it's like a heist film. Or it's like an action movie, but it happens to be about something that really happened. And I understand why you would want to do that, but I fear that some really essential aspect of what makes documentary cinema so unique is being lost in this rush to make them more commercially accessible by kind of turning them into fiction. And this is something that different people on the panel have already touched on, but I think there's a great danger in aping the techniques of fictional films too closely. I think the question of what is truth, can I trust what I'm looking at, is a valid one, and we should be asking it with every nonfiction film that we see and every time we watch the news. And I think I tend to check out a little bit emotionally and intellectually if I'm watching a documentary and they're too intrusive with the music. There's too many montages driven by cute, ironic pop songs. There's if there's a score, if it's too kind of sounds too much like a score for like the kind of genre film that the filmmakers are trying to make me think this is. Like Man on Wire, which is one of the best documentary films I've ever seen. I mean, really powerful stuff. When I found out later that a lot of the sequences in that were recreated after the fact, to the point where probably 30% of that movie is fictionalized, recreated material, suddenly I didn't love it quite as much. And I thought, all things considered, I often would rather just see the camera pointed at the face of someone who is interesting and hear them tell their story, like Alpert and David Maysles used to do back in the day. But I'm old, of course I feel that.
I think reality TV is to blame a lot for that.
Yeah.
Hyperactive cutting.
But you didn't see the last episode.
I didn't see the last episode.
So
It's on his DVR.
I want you had your hand raised and then Nell, so please.
I just want to reply to what Brian just said about Netflix and how, it seems like the majority of the documentaries on there are not particularly good. And I've paid attention to that as well. And the one thing that I see that's very common to Netflix documentaries is the majority of them are either on topics that have great sex appeal or are on celebrities of some form, okay? So one of those two things automatically gives you a kind of hook that raises and elevates the profile of the film right away if you're dealing with someone who's incredibly well known, or again, a topic that's really sexy. Now, Rick and I, if you don't mind me giving this away, we're, as well as being filmmakers, we're also distributors, and we've been distributing social issue documentaries for both of us for almost 20 years through a filmmaker co-op called New Day Films. And New Day Films distributes social issue documentaries and the kind of films that are essentially made to try to bring about social change. And a lot of them are well-known films and raised to a certain level that they get seen by the press or they get a lot of festival play or big awards, but not all of them do. And one of the things I've actually found is that in some ways, some of the films that are more niche related, and so that means they don't have the kind of filmmaking that you're talking about, Matt, that's going to draw a huge audience, but that are really targeted towards specific cultures and specific niches and specific social movements that are already in place. And they take those films and use them as tools for the kind of work they're doing and spread that out. So in some ways, I think a lot of the documentaries that matter the most, and a lot of them were on POV, and I know you program them as well, didn't quite always rise to that high level that they're on a Netflix or they're reviewed everywhere or they're in Sundance, but yet a little bit below the surface are really making a difference.
But let me ask you a question in terms of marketing. I mean, how do you guys, because when I think about the documentaries on Netflix, they're selling a certain kind of sexy documentary style. And I think that when documentaries are really great, you don't have to do that. But then if you have a distribution company, how do you then reach that target audience if you don't kind of use some of that same kind of sizzle to sell it?
Well, I think I could respond to that. What we do at New Day is we're mostly going to educational audience, which means colleges and universities, sometimes high schools, a lot of organizations, nonprofit organizations or advocacy organizations. And so we have targets, and that's another thing about documentary films. I mean, you can make a documentary film that's pure entertainment,
right,
and you might get a bigger market or you might not. But in the end, it may stop when the credits roll. The influence of that documentary may stop at the credit roll. And what we're looking for is for the documentary to be the starting point of whatever the issue is, whether, in my case now, mental illness or the press or mascots in sports or whatever. These are the starting points to get conversations going And when organizations already exist, or sometimes they branch out from the film, but usually they already exist, that can use that film, it's a great tool to get more people interested in it, because it starts with a film. You can always get somebody to sit down and look at a film and then run the conversation, either right there or carry it to the next step, or to your neighborhood, or to your circle of friends, or to your network.
So, Nell, I think you had your hand up there also, please.
Yeah, I think the issues that Matt raises, you have to put a little bit of blame on Michael Moore for sort of inventing and expanding the idea of getting archival footage that is kind of air quotes around the a lot of snark and air quotes and irony in the storytelling as a way of putting some sizzle on it. But also remember that Oscar-winning film like An Inconvenient Truth was basically a PowerPoint presentation, and March of the Penguins was just penguins.
There was acting involved. There was acting.
There was acting.
Idiot. Like, you couldn't do it.
I like that. That was good. You can tell he's a professional actor. But I think if I can mention Roger one more time, the episode of Siskel and Ebert that really was transformational for me. I was in law school by that time and was watching it, and they talked about an Errol Morris film. And for me, at that point, documentaries meant something you watched in science class, and they were very, very, very boring and very objective and very gray.
Is this the Thin Blue Line?
No, it was the one about the pet
Gates of Heaven.
cemetery?
Gates of Heaven.
Gates of
Oh,
Heaven.
Gates of Heaven, yeah.
And I said, and that really was just like one of the biggest light bulbs ever went off over my head. And I said, oh, you could have a point of view in a documentary. That's very interesting. And so I like movies where there is a point of view and where you do have a voice. And Morgan Spurlock, for example, I'm not saying every documentary should be like that, but I love that he's figured out a way to bring his voice to his films. And I also want to say, you all know the Citizens United case. Let's remember that was about a documentary about Hillary Clinton, and there's an insidious element to this as well, not just the focus on the family stuff, but Dinesh D'Souza makes a lot of money. His nickname is Distort Danusa, and but critics have a very important role to play there too.
Just ask, focus on the fan.
Yeah.
So before we open this up to questions, actually, Sasha, I had a question for you, and that's because you work both in television and in documentary film, and the role of entertainment in documentary film. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that, and then we're going to open this up to questions.
I think it's important, on one hand, there's this documentaries that you watched in science class that you wanted to fall asleep with, and they probably presented facts, and they probably presented them pretty accurately. So I think as filmmakers, we try to present what we see as really happening with some artistic license. And so I think maybe sometimes filmmakers go too far, but I do think that it's okay to be entertaining, that it's okay to have laughs in a documentary, that it's okay to sometimes use music to help emotion. And I do work and I think many, many, many people in LA work in many areas of media, and I work in some reality, and some of it I'm very proud of, and some of it, for example, we did a show this year called Born This Way about young adults with Down syndrome that won an Emmy this year. And in some ways the filmmaking is very similar in that as it is to making documentaries. I mean, there is a similarity, and in some ways it's very, very different. But I don't know, I think if you can make a film about an issue and your film is entertaining and moving and makes people really think about the issue, that you've succeeded. So I don't think there's just one way to make a film.
I agree with that. And I have to mention one movie that I saw in science class because I really, no, just serious.
The Walrus. The Walrus.
Yeah, right. No, and I really, really loved it. When it came on video when I was an adult, I thought even though the science was a little out of date, I would get it for my kids. and it was actually directed by Frank Capra. So it's Our Mr. Sun.
But you know, can I, a question. You know, because I'm curious. Is there a if a documentary filmmaker manipulates it some, like you say, music or uses clips, are there rules and regulations? I mean, I'm going to ask you guys. You know what I'm saying? Because I get what you're saying. There's a part that is commercial, but then if you say I want to score it or you want, is that crossing the line? I mean, I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, I think most documentaries are completely overscored. So that's just my feeling about it. I think less is more with music, and Ben is going to score whatever I say from now on. It's going to work better.
We're going to score the panel.
Sweeten it a little bit.
But
Rick, go ahead.
I think there aren't rules, and I think in some ways that's okay because there are so many different approaches to documentary. And a good documentary can have no music, and another good documentary can have a terrific score that's totally appropriate. And there's also approaches. So I think that's the good thing, and I think it's also it's a potential danger that we don't have kind of more accepted rules on what documentaries need to adhere to, so that the whole genre will be believable this year, next year, and into the future.
Hold on. I'm gonna let Matt had a very quizzical look, and then I really do need to open this up to the audience. So Matt, explain that quizzical look, and then we'll go.
You're talking about rules. I was just going to share a little story about interviewing the late Albert Maysles. We showed his and his brother David's great documentary Salesman, which if you haven't seen that, see it immediately. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. And
I agree.
He was talking about his attitude. You know, the fly on the wall, the so-called direct cinema movement, really believed that you should just take your camera, go interview people, and present the information in a reasonably concise way, and not mess with it too much. And there's no narrators, no scores, no talking heads, none of that stuff. They didn't believe in any of that. However, they broke the rules when they felt like they needed to. And there was a moment in Salesman, I was interviewing about it, where he was talking about his and his brother's attitude about this stuff. And he said, one of the rules we made was there was going to be no score in this movie, and there was going to be no time compression. Like we weren't gonna like compress a moment and make it seem like it was a continuous moment. And I said, yeah, but with all due respect, there's actually a scene in the movie where you break both of those rules. And I told him what it was. And there was a long pause, and I thought maybe I shouldn't have brought this up. And he just kind of stared. He just kind of stared in space, and he said, "All right, you got me."
Okay, I want to open this up to all of you to engage with these guys. So please, if you have questions, come up to the mic here. And if you could tell us your name before you answer your question.
My name is Marianne Brandon. I'm from Michigan, and we just had the Detroit Free Press just had a film festival based on documentaries, which they showed all documentaries. My question really is, and you maybe answered and I didn't get it, is so what really is the difference between a documentary and a film that's based on facts? You know, the one with the priests was made into a film. The one about the whole mortgage crisis was made into a film. So what is really the difference, and how much can you believe a documentary versus a film based on real stories?
Well, you can have a fictional film based on true events that's much more emotionally honest than a documentary that uses real footage. I think it's much more about the emotional honesty of a piece that you're working with, for me, that makes it real or not, as opposed to the origin of the footage. So I think it goes both ways. But I mean, anyone else want to add to that?
Well, generally speaking, though, I mean, a documentary is like a news story. You're taking pictures of the real people. You're not getting Ryan Gosling to play the real person. And of course, Ryan Gosling is always going to be a compelling presence. But I bet everybody on the panel will agree that on the issue of Man on Wire, the documentary is vastly better than the feature film based on it. And I would say Dogtown and Z-Boys, which is a favorite of mine. The documentary is vastly better than the movie based on it. And that shows you what the difference is.
I just want to mention, though, that more and more, though, today, reenactments have become more and more accepted within what we still call documentaries, and you're seeing more and more reenactments, and not only in more films, but for more minutes within films. And I think that sort of has blurred that line that you're talking about, and I'm not sure that you can really find that line anymore because of that.
When you're telling a story about something that predates the invention of moving pictures, I think you run into that problem. Like if you're doing a documentary about Napoleon, what are you going to do? Stare at the same 8 paintings of Napoleon for 2 hours?
Well, I actually think that
Ken
it's
Burns
just
did
two
okay with
different
Ken Burns
approaches.
did
Yeah, I was going to say Ken Burns is a perfect example. That's what he does, and I think it's just just like in literature, or you could take journalism, you could take nonfiction writing, and you could take novels, and it's 3 different ways of telling what could be a similar story or could be based on the same events. And I think they're all absolutely legitimate art forms. I'm glad we have them all, and I'm glad we have the different cinematic art
I would
forms
argue
as
that
well.
the only person who's allowed to really make movies that way on a big scale and be seen by a lot of people is Ken Burns.
Let's go to our next. Let's go to our next question, please. Go.
Hi, my name is Ellie Gross. I'm from the Chicago area. And a few years ago, I went to the Peace on Earth Film Festival in Chicago with my daughter from Kenosha. And so first I want to tell a brief little story about that and then ask a question. So one of the films we saw was called Inside Peace. It was about a program brought to the prison system that helped rehabilitate prisoners. At the end of the film, they brought up the prisoners who were already released and already rehabilitated. It's quite moving. My daughter, we were both so moved, she contacted the filmmaker, got a copy of the film, brought it to the people in Kenosha that have something to do with rehabilitation, and through several meetings and interest, it was brought now as being used in the addiction program for rehabilitation. That's great. I love the whole process. We needed a filmmaker that was open enough to loan out her film. So my question is, are filmmakers open to that? And also, when you talk about a niche, it took real people who were inspired to bring it to the right people. And so my question or comment is, how do you do that? You can put it in the catalog, but how do you get real people that watch it to bring it to the other people?
Jay.
Well, one of the things we have learned to do in New Day Films is we try very hard to connect with any existing organizations that are already doing work around whatever the topic is that the film's about. And, it's just kind of shoe leather in a way, although a lot of it is mostly email and electronic now, is you try to connect with those organizations. It's better if you connect with them before the film is even done and start to create some partnerships with them. And you try to get access to their mailing lists, and you really just try to target the organizations that are already in place, and let them know that you have this tool that they might want to use.
Yeah, just to build on that, my current film, which is incidentally playing it Saturday at 11 o'clock here, Mind Game. It's about mental health and also about sports. And during the making of it, indeed, I was in contact with many mental health organizations. And so now there's mental health advocacy and education organizations that show the film, and we partner with them. I've shown it at nurses' trainings at psychiatric hospitals, sports psychologists, meetings, conferences, suicidology conferences. So it's that sort of thing that I think is actually incumbent on a documentary filmmaker. If it is about a social issue that you feel like you want to make a difference, it's really incumbent on you to make those sorts of connections. Otherwise, it's the tree in the forest that nobody hears.
And it's an entirely different skill set from making a movie, is to figuring out how to get it out there.
Yeah.
This may sound corny, but I'd encourage you to tell that story to people too. More people will go to the festival. It could happen to someone else. There's a viral aspect to all of this.
So Richard, go ahead, and then I'm going to squeeze in the final 3 questions. I'm
Sure.
going to ask everyone to be really pithy.
Isn't there also getting the information out there in terms of even before the film is made and crowdsourcing and so on? I know a documentary filmmaker who I sort of get regular emails from him about progress he's making, but also kind of soliciting funds. And now with things like Indiegogo and other sites like that, a lot of that information, about the film, what it's about, even the various techniques that are going to be used in it, actually can get out there before the film even comes out. And presumably the people who contribute to that project through those sorts of sourcing, crowdsourcing endeavors will presumably be publicizing that film and spreading the word about that film even before it comes out.
So we only have 1 minute. I'm getting the signal of time is up. So I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll have to wrap this up. Sorry.
Aloha, my name is Joshua Lee. I'm from Hawaii. I'm an emerging filmmaker and producer in Hawaii, and my main question to you guys is that I've seen a fall off of the desire to make or watch documentaries, especially in young people in my generation. What do you think is going to be the next step to create powerful documentaries for my generation to follow suit as an emerging filmmaker? It's interesting because there is a documentary class at University of Hawaii, Minow, and it's focused on telling unique stories from people of Hawaii that are not normally heard from. And so it hasn't made any progress, and I want to see what I can do to possibly propel that forward.
Wow. I just was reading recently that Vice News, which was thought of as the great savior of documentary filmmaking for people under 30. This is what was going to get the youngins to get into documentary, that apparently Vice mainly appeals to people in their 30s and 40s. So I don't know. I don't know if there's an easy quick fix. And it may be possible, to jump on something I was talking about earlier, that the way that we receive information has rewired our brains to the extent that the 90-minute to 2-hour documentary format doesn't appeal to people of that generation anymore. I mean, that would be a horrible, sad thought, but we have to at least consider it.
Well, I would say to you, what is the subject matter that's engaging to the audience that you're trying to reach? I mean, because that's the real conversation. Because if you say, hey, there are these themes that the youth are interested in, I think it starts there, and they go like, oh, I want to know more about this or more about that. Because it just depends. Because if it's something that's not going to engage them, then they're not going to tune in.
I'd like to say that Jeff Sessions is wrong. Hawaii is a state. and I'd also like to say that the incredible mushrooming and viral success of documentary podcasts shows that there is a big audience in millennials for this kind of material. It's just a question of, you just got to find a quirky clockmaker from Alabama, and you're good.
Sasha, one last comment, and then we'll wrap.
From what I understand from people like Netflix and Amazon that do this kind of research is that actually millennials are very interested in documentaries. I think, again, it has to be a subject that's of interest, but that as a reaction to news being so, most news feeds just being so short, that people are interested in, when they're interested in a subject, in diving very deeply into it. So that made me optimistic. So I hope the statistics I've read are right.
Well, that's a good optimistic note to end on. I want to thank Chaz and Nate for bringing us all together this morning. Thank you for coming out early on a Friday morning to talk about documentary film. It's my passion. And thanks to all of our panelists for their conversation.
Thank you, Simon.